The morning began like any other day. The city was already awake, filled with noise, movement, and people rushing to places they believed were important. Cars moved slowly through traffic, horns sounding without reason. Street vendors called out loudly, trying to sell tea, fruit, or cheap snacks. Office workers walked fast, eyes fixed on their phones. Everyone seemed busy, but no one seemed to be looking at each other. Near a large commercial building stood a small cleaning station. It was not fancy, just a bucket, a mop, and a narrow area near the entrance that needed to stay clean. The person working there was a young woman. She wore a faded uniform that had been washed too many times. Her shoes were worn, and her hands were rough from constant work. Still, she worked quietly, focused on the floor in front of her. She had been there since early morning. Cleaning, wiping, bending, standing again. She did not complain. She knew this job was all she had. Missing even one day could mean losing everything. Rent, food, and medicine for an older relative at home depended on this small income. As she cleaned, people passed her without notice. Some stepped over her bucket as if it were not there. A few looked at her with brief irritation, annoyed that she took up space. Most did not look at her at all. Then a black luxury car stopped near the entrance. Its shine stood out against the dusty road. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the back door. A man in expensive clothes came out. His shoes were polished, his watch heavy and bright. His face showed confidence mixed with arrogance. He walked as if the world belonged to him. As he approached the entrance, his foot slipped slightly on the damp floor. It was not a fall, not even close, but it was enough to hurt his pride. He turned sharply. His eyes landed on the young woman holding the mop. "Are you blind?" he shouted loudly. His voice cut through the noise of the street. People slowed down. Some stopped. The woman froze. She lowered her head immediately. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Her voice shook. "The floor is still drying." I tried to warn. He did not let her finish. "You tried to warn?" He laughed loudly. "Look at this place. You people never do anything right." His words were sharp, heavy, cruel. He kicked the bucket aside. Dirty water spilled across the clean floor. The mop fell from her hands. She stepped back, shocked. Her eyes filled with tears, but she tried hard not to cry. "Clean it again," he ordered, "and do it properly this time." The people watching said nothing. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to see. A few even smiled nervously, happy they were not the target. The woman bent down quickly, trying to fix the mess. Her hands trembled as she picked up the bucket. Water dripped from the floor onto her clothes. "I said clean it properly," the man repeated. "If you can't even do this, you don't deserve to be here." His words hit harder than his actions. At the edge of the crowd stood another man. He looked simple. His clothes were neat, but not flashy. He carried no visible signs of wealth. If someone looked at him, they would think he was just another professional heading to work. But he was not just watching. He had stopped walking the moment he heard the shout. His eyes stayed on the scene, calm, focused, observing every detail. He saw the fear in the woman's eyes. He saw the way her shoulders curled inward, trying to make herself smaller. He saw the pride on the cruel man's face, the confidence that no one would stop him. Most people would feel anger. Some would feel pity. Many would look away. This man felt something deeper, a memory. Long ago, he had stood in a similar place. Not with a mop, but with empty pockets. He remembered what it felt like to be treated as invisible. Worse than invisible, replaceable. The cruel man stepped closer to the woman. "Look at me when I talk to you," he said. She tried. But her eyes could not stay up for long. Said, "Look at me." His voice rose again. The crowd remained silent. The quiet observer took a slow step forward. Not close enough to draw attention. Just close enough to hear everything clearly. The woman whispered again, "I'm sorry." "I'll clean it again," the man laughed. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," he said. "People like you only understand when you're taught a lesson." That sentence hung heavy in the air. The observer's jaw tightened slightly. His hands stayed relaxed by his sides, but his mind moved fast. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. The cruel man finally turned away, satisfied with his display of power. He adjusted his jacket and walked toward the building entrance as if nothing had happened. The woman dropped to her knees and began wiping the floor with shaking hands. Her tears fell silently onto the tiles, mixing with dirty water. People began moving again. The moment passed for them, but not for the observer. He stood there a little longer, watching the woman clean the mess that was never her fault. Watching how easily cruelty could happen in public. Watching how quickly people forgot. Then he turned and walked away. Anyone watching him leave would think he had chosen silence, that he had chosen to ignore what he saw. They would be wrong. As he walked, he took out his phone. Not to make a call. Just to open the camera, he reviewed the short video he had recorded. Clear, the faces visible. The words audible. His expression did not change. Justice did not need anger. It needed patience, and it was already on its way. The day continued as usual. The streets buzzed with life. Cars honking, people rushing to work, children running along sidewalks. Yet the incident from the morning stayed in the mind of the observer. The image of the young woman, tears quietly falling while cleaning the floor she had not dirtied, did not leave him. He could not shake the feeling that something had to be done. He walked to his car, simple black vehicle that did not draw attention. Inside, he remained quiet, reflecting on what he had seen. Most people would have thought the problem too small, too ordinary. Yet he could not. He had built his life on understanding people, on noticing what others ignored. He had always believed that even small acts of cruelty mattered. Even the quietest suffering deserved attention. He returned home to his large, quiet house. It was filled with light, tastefully decorated and orderly. But the comfort of wealth never distracted him from reality. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop. He searched for any news reports, any records, any information about the man he had seen earlier. The task was simple in his world, with the right connections. The truth was always accessible. While he worked, he thought about the young woman. Who was she? Where did she live? How much did she endure every day just to survive? The more he thought, the more he realized that people like her were invisible in society. Often ignored, often treated as less than human. And yet, they bore the weight of life quietly, without complaint. He decided to act carefully. Direct confrontation could be dangerous. The man was powerful and used to control. Instead, he reached out through discreet channels. He contacted people who could help without revealing his own identity. Legal advisors, local authorities, and even reporters who valued the truth. He gathered every piece of evidence he could find: videos, witness statements, records of complaints. Each piece strengthened the story he was building. Meanwhile, he sent a small note through a mutual contact to the young woman. It was anonymous but kind, offering a helping hand without expecting anything in return. She received the note and felt a flicker of hope. It was the first sign that someone noticed her suffering. But she remained cautious. Life had taught her that promises were often empty and help was rare. Days passed. The man continued his life as usual, unaware that someone had begun quietly building a case against him. He boasted about his influence, laughed about his power, and believed no one could touch him. The young woman still worked each day, her hands rough, her back sore, and her heart heavy. Yet, she found herself glancing at the note from the anonymous helper whenever despair crept in. It reminded her that not everyone was cruel. Some people noticed, some people cared. The observer continued his careful monitoring. He did not reveal himself. To others, he remained just another man moving through the city, unnoticed. But he watched everything: the man's movements, the way he treated others, the fear he instilled. He spoke quietly with witnesses, ensured their safety, and built a network of information. He acted like a shadow, unseen but everywhere. One evening, he visited a small cafe near the young woman's workplace. He stayed in a corner, observing. She came in, tired, carrying her small bag, ordering a cup of tea. She was still cautious but seemed a little lighter in spirit. The observer noted her small smile when she saw someone drop a coin for a street child outside. She noticed kindness, even in little things, because she understood what cruelty felt like. He left the cafe before she could see him. His role was not to comfort her directly, at least not yet. His role was to prepare, to make sure that when justice came, it would be thorough, undeniable, and fast. He knew that timing was everything. Acting too soon could ruin everything. Acting too late could allow more harm. The young woman returned home that evening. Her small apartment was simple, with a few personal belongings and memories of better times. She had learned to be grateful for what little she had. She prepared her modest meal, thinking about the note she had received. It was unusual, this unexpected kindness. It made her wonder if someone, somewhere, truly cared about her well-being. She thought about the morning incident again, how easily people had ignored her suffering. The contrast between cruelty and kindness puzzled her. The observer, meanwhile, reviewed the day's findings. He had managed to track the man's recent activities, his interactions with employees, and some previous complaints that had never led anywhere. Each piece fit into a bigger picture. He saw patterns of behavior, ways the man exploited fear and power. The more he saw, the more determined he became. He knew that direct help for the young woman was not enough. She deserved protection, opportunity, and dignity. The problem was larger than her alone. It was about standing up to cruelty, showing that actions had consequences, and that those who suffered were not invisible. Late that night, he made a final call through encrypted channels. His words were quiet, but firm. He instructed certain people to watch over the young woman without letting her know. Safety, he decided, was the first priority. The second priority was the evidence he had gathered. It had to be undeniable, so that no excuses could protect the cruel man. The young woman slept that night unaware of the growing plan around her. She dreamed of a life without fear, where she could work without humiliation, where her small acts of kindness were noticed. She did not know that someone had seen, remembered, and was preparing to act on her behalf. Someone who understood that real power was not in wealth or dominance, but in protecting what was right. The observer sat in his quiet home, lights dimmed, reviewing the video again. He watched her movements, her careful work, her quiet endurance. He did not feel pride or triumph yet. That would come later. For now, he felt a calm determination, a steady resolve to ensure that justice would arrive in the right way at the right time, in that moment. He made a silent promise. He would not allow the cruelty to continue unnoticed. He would make sure that the young woman could continue her life without fear, and he would show, without announcing himself, that there were still people in the world who noticed, who cared, who could act when necessary. As the city slept, life went on. But behind the ordinary routines, a quiet preparation was taking place. A story of cruelty, patience, and silent determination was unfolding. The young woman was still unaware of the help forming around her, and the man who had shown such arrogance continued in his ignorance. But soon, everything would change, and the observer knew it. Days turned into weeks, but for the cruel man, life seemed perfect. He moved through his office as if it were a stage built entirely for him. People around him laughed at his jokes, agreed with his every word, and feared his temper. In his mind, he had created a world where no one could challenge him. He was untouchable, and anyone who tried would face consequences far worse than humiliation. He remembered the incident with the young woman, but only as a minor irritation. To him, it was an insignificant obstacle, something beneath his attention. He believed that wealth, status, and fear were the perfect shields. Why would anyone dare to stop him? To him, the world was his playground. But outside his bubble, the quiet observer continued his work. Every move of the cruel man was carefully noted. Conversations were recorded, witness accounts collected, and actions documented. The billionaire was patient. He understood that confronting the man too early would alert him, make him careful, and possibly ruin the chance to make justice permanent. Patience, he believed, was a weapon more powerful than anger. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled every day. The morning incident was still fresh in her mind, Every interaction, every glance, reminded her of the humiliation she had suffered. Yet, she carried on, bending and cleaning, working silently so that no one would notice if she slowed down. Her dignity was quiet, but it was strong. She held on to it, even when people treated her as if she were invisible. The cruel man did not stop at her. He had other employees, other subordinates, who lived in constant fear of displeasing him. He made small threats, laughed at mistakes, and reminded everyone daily that he held power over their lives. The office became a place of tension. People smiled, but their eyes were wary. Laughter often hid discomfort. Everyone watched their words, careful not to provoke his wrath. One afternoon, the man called a meeting in his office. He paced back and forth, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. His voice was loud, cutting through the room. He spoke of loyalty, of hard work, and of what he expected from his team. But beneath the words was the real message: obedience, fear, and submission. Everyone nodded and smiled, but their hearts raced. They had learned to read the signs, to understand what would happen if they displeased him. The observer, meanwhile, reviewed the growing collection of evidence. Every conversation, every report, every witness statement added layers to the story. He carefully arranged each piece, thinking about how it would be used. This was not about revenge. It was about fairness. It was about showing that cruelty, no matter how powerful the person, would not go unanswered. He made sure to watch over the young woman as well. She had no idea that someone was protecting her quietly. He ensured she could move safely, that no threats could reach her. Even small gestures mattered, someone following discreetly, making sure she returned home safely, noting anyone who seemed suspicious. Safety was the first priority before justice could be served. In the office, the cruel man felt untouchable. He made jokes about people he had humiliated, not realizing that his actions were being carefully documented. He believed that his wealth and power could erase mistakes and shield him from consequences. To him, life was predictable. People were predictable. The world bent to his will, or at least, that was what he thought. But outside the office, the world was quietly preparing for a change. The observer coordinated with legal experts and trusted contacts, ensuring that every step was carefully calculated. The goal was not to humiliate the man in public, though that might happen naturally. The goal was to ensure that justice could not be avoided, ignored, or delayed. Timing was critical. He knew that when the moment arrived, it had to be decisive. The young woman noticed small changes in her surroundings, though she did not understand them. People seemed more cautious around her, some offering help quietly. Nothing was explained, nothing announced. She felt safer, though she did not know why. Her heart was lighter, even if only slightly. She began to believe that perhaps there were people in the world who noticed her struggles, who cared about her safety. Meanwhile, the cruel man continued his life as usual. He walked through the city's streets, confident in his control, laughing at minor inconveniences, scolding anyone who dared to question him. He was unaware that the careful network around him had begun working silently. Each person involved acted without drawing attention. Each step a quiet preparation for what was to come. The observer continued to follow the man, attending meetings, noting interactions, and documenting evidence. He spoke discreetly to witnesses, ensuring they understood their rights, their safety, and the importance of truth. Fear was natural, he knew, but courage could be built when support was quiet but unwavering. The young woman's story, along with others, became the center of a web of truth, waiting to be revealed. Late at night, the cruel man often sat alone in his office. He thought of his accomplishments, his wealth, and his influence. He believed he was untouchable, a ruler in his own small empire. He laughed at the idea of consequences. Life, he thought, had been too easy for him to worry about fairness. The observer, however, was never idle. Late nights were spent analyzing, planning, and preparing. Every detail was considered: what the man had done, how he had treated people, and what would be the most effective way to ensure justice. All of it was carefully calculated. The billionaire understood that justice must be thorough, clear, and undeniable. There could be no mistakes, no shortcuts. In the city, life continued around them. People walked, laughed, argued, and worked. But beneath the ordinary routines, the tension grew. The cruel man remained oblivious, enjoying his perceived invincibility. The young woman continued her work, finding small moments of hope in unexpected kindness. And the observer moved quietly, patiently, ensuring that when the time came, justice would arrive fully and decisively. The story of cruelty, fear, patience, and careful planning was building momentum. Each day added more pieces to the puzzle, more proof that even the untouchable could be held accountable. The observer knew that the right moment would come, that the consequences of the man's actions would finally be undeniable. And he waited, quietly, patiently, knowing that when justice arrived, it would be faster than anyone expected. The morning sun rose slowly over the city, casting a golden light on streets that were already busy with movement. People hurried along sidewalks, cars honked in traffic, and vendors began setting up their small stands. To the cruel man, it was a normal day. He left his apartment, dressed perfectly in a crisp suit, walking with the same confidence that had carried him through his life. He believed nothing could touch him, no one could challenge his authority. But the world around him was changing in ways he could not see. The quiet observer had spent weeks preparing, gathering proof, connecting the right people, making sure every detail was in place. Evidence that would make it impossible for anyone to ignore what had happened. Witnesses were ready, documents were prepared, and media channels were alerted. Everything was ready to be revealed, and the timing was perfect. The cruel man walked into his office, greeting his staff with the usual arrogance. People smiled, nodded, and moved quickly to follow his instructions. But some of them were different today. Some moved with careful attention, some whispered to each other, and some seemed uneasy, their eyes avoiding his as though they were hiding something. He noticed little of it, assuming they were just nervous like always. Then the first message arrived. It was subtle, almost invisible at first. An email to his assistant, copied to several legal authorities, media contacts, and company auditors. The contents were clear, the reports of his actions, the evidence, the videos, and statements from multiple witnesses, all compiled in an organized file. It was undeniable. Each piece confirmed the story of his cruelty, his abuse, and his misuse of power. The assistant looked at him nervously, not knowing how to speak. The cruel man, confident as ever, asked for the report. She hesitated, and then, trembling slightly, handed him the tablet showing the first report. As he opened it, his eyes widened. Numbers, videos, photographs, witness statements all, presented in a way that left no room for argument. He read, then reread, the details. The room seemed to shrink around him. Outside news channels and online media had begun broadcasting stories of his actions. Videos had been verified, witness statements confirmed, and the details spread across the city within hours. People who had once been too afraid to speak now felt their voices supported and protected. The young woman watched the news in disbelief. She saw herself on the screen, her story told clearly and truthfully, and realized that she was no longer alone. The cruel man tried to speak, to explain, to argue, but every word felt small and weak. His power, which had once seemed unbreakable, was now irrelevant. He called his lawyer, his friends, and even his family, but the response was slow and cautious. People had begun to distance themselves, unwilling to be connected to the scandal, now spreading faster than anyone could stop. Authorities arrived at his office to ask questions. They were calm, professional, and determined. The cruel man felt his confidence crumble with every step they took. For the first time, he realized that the world he thought he controlled had slipped through his fingers. Fear, which he had instilled in others for so long, now surrounded him. His influence was no longer a shield. It was irrelevant. Meanwhile, the observer watched quietly from a distance. He did not seek attention or recognition. His role had been to ensure that justice could happen, and now it was unfolding exactly as he had planned. He saw the relief on the young woman's face. the calm determination of the authorities, and the confusion of the cruel man. Everything was falling into place. The young woman, who had once felt powerless, now felt a quiet strength. People reached out to her, offering support, sympathy, and encouragement. She realized that courage could exist in unexpected ways, and that standing by the truth could bring change. For the first time in her life, she believed that fairness could arrive. Even in a world that often ignored those without power, the cruel man spent hours trying to understand what had happened. Each explanation he considered only made it worse. He realized that he had underestimated people's determination, their ability to act, and their unwillingness to let cruelty go unchecked. His wealth and status, which had once protected him, were now irrelevant. The consequences he had never imagined were finally arriving. The news spread further. Social media shared the story widely. People discussed the incident, and debates began about responsibility, fairness, and the power dynamics that allowed such cruelty to exist. Support for the young woman grew, and the cruel man became a cautionary example of what happens when arrogance and cruelty go unchecked. Every corner of the city seemed to be talking about the story. The observer continued to monitor the situation. He saw the young woman receiving assistance, her work environment changing for the better, and authorities following through on the legal process. He knew that the initial act of cruelty had been the catalyst, but it was the careful, patient preparation that had allowed justice to arrive fully and decisively. His quiet work had ensured that the outcome was not only immediate, but permanent. The cruel man finally realized that his reputation was gone. His fear of losing control was replaced by fear of accountability. He had lived his life believing he was untouchable, but the events of this day proved him wrong. Every action he had taken, every person he had intimidated, every injustice he had committed was now facing consequences he could no longer avoid. The young woman, for her part, began to rebuild her life. She returned to work with renewed confidence, knowing that the world could recognize her worth and that cruelty would not be ignored. People treated her with respect, and opportunities began to open in ways she had never imagined. Her small acts of perseverance and dignity had been acknowledged and rewarded. She began to dream of a future without fear. The city moved on, but the impact of this day remained. The story became an example of how justice, even when delayed or hidden, could arrive quickly and decisively. It showed that cruelty might exist, but those who act with patience, courage, and determination can bring it to an end. The observer, satisfied with the outcome, knew that his role had been fulfilled. He did not need recognition. He had ensured that fairness had been served and that the young woman was safe and empowered. As night fell, the city was quiet again, but the echoes of the day's events remained. The cruel man, once confident and untouchable, was left to reflect on his actions. The young woman, once powerless, now stood stronger than ever. And the observer, who had watched and acted in silence, knew that the world had shifted in a meaningful way. Justice had arrived faster than anyone expected, and it had changed lives forever. After the whirlwind of the previous day, the city felt different. There was a quiet sense of relief in the air, an invisible wave that touched the lives of those who had suffered in silence for too long. People walked more freely, spoke more openly, and found comfort in knowing that justice could arrive, even when it seemed impossible. The young woman, now at the center of a story that had spread far beyond her neighborhood, felt a sense of calm she had never experienced before. Her life slowly began to change. Opportunities she had never imagined became possible. People treated her with respect and care. Her workplace became a safe space, where she could perform her duties without fear of humiliation or abuse. Small gestures, like colleagues offering assistance or acknowledging her work, began to rebuild the confidence that had been eroded by months of suffering. Every day, she felt a little stronger, a little more certain that she deserved a life of dignity and respect. The observer watched these changes quietly from afar. He did not seek praise or recognition. For him, the act of ensuring justice and protecting someone vulnerable was its own reward. Yet, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the young woman could finally live without fear, that the cruelty she had endured was met with consequences. and that she was now empowered to take control of her own life. He continued to check in subtly, making sure that she remained safe and supported. Without ever revealing himself directly, the cruel man, on the other hand, faced the full weight of accountability. Legal actions continued, social consequences deepened, and his influence began to vanish. People who once obeyed him now spoke freely, unafraid of retribution. The fear that had defined his life and allowed him to dominate others evaporated quickly. He realized that power based on intimidation and cruelty was fragile, and that reputation alone could not protect him from the consequences of his actions, despite the chaos that had surrounded him. The young woman did not feel triumphant in a boastful way. She felt a quiet sense of justice and closure. The world had recognized her worth, and cruelty had been confronted. She began to imagine a future where she could pursue her dreams, help others, and live a life free from the shadow of fear. Each small act of kindness she had extended in her daily life now seemed to have meaning, as if the world had finally noticed her heart, her strength, and her perseverance. People around the city began to talk about the story. It became an example of courage, patience, and the power of standing up for what is right. Those who had remained silent for fear of repercussions now felt encouraged to speak out against injustice. The ripple effect spread through workplaces, neighborhoods, and communities. The story of the young woman, the cruel man, and the quiet observer reminded people that even small acts of cruelty could be challenged, and that fairness could prevail when determined. Careful action was taken. The young woman's life gradually shifted from one of survival to one of purpose. She pursued opportunities for education and skill development, and people who had once ignored her began to acknowledge her talent and dedication. Each day brought a new chance to grow, to help others, and to live a life of meaning. She felt empowered not because she had gained wealth or recognition, but because the world had finally shown that her dignity mattered. She understood that courage was not always loud. It could be quiet, patient, and deliberate. The observer, whose identity remained unknown to her, continued his work in silence. He knew that his role was not to seek fame, but to ensure that justice could exist in a world that often overlooked the powerless. His careful planning and patient observation had created a situation where fairness arrived quickly and decisively. For him, the story was a testament to the idea that good deeds, even when unseen, could change lives profoundly. The world may not always recognize the quiet efforts behind justice, but their impact was undeniable. The cruel man, reflecting on his fall from perceived invincibility, began to understand the fragility of arrogance and the weight of accountability. He saw that cruelty, no matter how well hidden or justified in one's mind, eventually surfaces, and that patience, observation, and determination from the right people could dismantle even the most carefully constructed walls of power. He was forced to confront not only the consequences of his actions, but also the reality that fear could no longer protect him. His life, once defined by dominance, was now defined by reflection and loss. The young woman in time became a quiet source of inspiration for those around her. People saw her resilience and her ability to continue living with dignity despite past hardships. She helped others who faced similar struggles, offering guidance and encouragement, showing that the experience of suffering could be transformed into strength. She became a symbol of perseverance and the human capacity to rise above cruelty. Her story spread through conversations, social media, and local communities, becoming a beacon of hope for those who felt powerless. Through it all, the observer remained unseen, his actions unrecognized by the public. He knew that the impact mattered more than the credit. Justice had arrived, and it had been decisive. The young woman had been empowered, the cruel man held accountable, and the city reminded that even when acts of cruelty occur, careful, determined action can restore fairness. The observer had fulfilled his purpose, ensuring that the world, at least in this small corner, had been corrected. In the end, the lesson spread beyond the immediate individuals involved. People learned that courage does not always roar. It can be quiet. It can be patient. It can be deliberate. One person noticing, one person taking action, can change the course of events in ways no one could predict. The story became a reminder that human dignity matters, that cruelty cannot go unchecked, and that justice, when pursued carefully and wisely, can arrive faster than anyone expects. The city continued to move, bustling with life. But a new awareness lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed or heard the story. The young woman, once powerless, now carried herself with quiet strength. She smiled at small acts of kindness, she extended help to others, and she believed that fairness could exist in the world. And somewhere unnoticed, the observer continued his quiet work, ensuring that justice, patience, and care remain powerful forces in a world that often seemed indifferent. The story concluded not with a dramatic confrontation, but with quiet victories. Lives had been changed, lessons had been learned, and the ripple of courage and justice extended far beyond the initial act of cruelty. The young woman's life became a testament to resilience. The observer's actions, a reminder of the power of unseen determination, and the downfall of the cruel man, a lesson in the inevitability of accountability. The moral was clear: cruelty may exist, but it will not remain hidden forever, and justice, when pursued thoughtfully and persistently, can transform lives in ways that matter the most. The city was waking up again, but the rhythm felt different now. People moved with a little more ease. Conversations carried a note of hope, and there was a sense of quiet vigilance in the air. Life went on, yet the events of recent weeks had left a lasting impression. The story of cruelty, patience, and justice was no longer confined to whispers. It had become a part of the city's consciousness, a reminder that actions have consequences, and that fairness could arrive. Even in the most unexpected ways, the young woman's life continued to shift in remarkable ways. With the immediate threat gone, she found herself exploring opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Small businesses that had previously ignored her now welcomed her help. Her work environment had transformed into one of respect and encouragement. People listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and treated her with the dignity she had always deserved. The fear that had once weighed heavily on her shoulders was replaced with cautious optimism, a sense that she could finally breathe without looking over her shoulder. Even simple daily routines carried new meaning. As she walked to work, she noticed people smiling, offering polite greetings, and helping each other in small ways. The world seemed kinder, not because everyone had changed overnight, but because those who had once remained silent had learned that standing up for what is right mattered. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence born of endurance and the realization that she had survived something that could have broken her. The observer continued his quiet work, unseen but ever present. He monitored the young woman's progress subtly, ensuring that she remained safe and supported. His satisfaction was quiet and personal. He did not need recognition, only the knowledge that his patient planning and careful actions had made a real difference. He saw her take small steps toward independence, courage, and self-respect. And he knew that this was the true measure of success. The cruel man, now stripped of his illusions of invincibility, faced a new reality. Every action he had taken, every person he had intimidated, and every act of cruelty he had committed now had consequences that could not be ignored. His power had evaporated, and the social and legal repercussions were ongoing. He spent hours reflecting on the choices that had led him here. For the first time, he understood the fragility of control and the importance of treating people with fairness and respect. Fear and arrogance were no longer shields. They were liabilities. Communities around the city began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Stories of the young woman's resilience and the downfall of the cruel man spread. People discussed accountability, empathy, and courage. Conversations in cafes, offices, and homes shifted toward fairness and human dignity. Acts of cruelty that might have gone unnoticed before were now being questioned, challenged, and documented. The observer's careful planning had created a ripple effect, inspiring a culture of accountability that extended far beyond the original incident. The young woman, encouraged by these changes, began to look forward to the future with hope. She explored further education, developed skills that had long been dormant, pursued opportunities that aligned with her passions. People who had once dismissed her now recognized her dedication and potential. She became an example to others, quietly showing that even those who appear powerless can create meaningful change when they act with perseverance and integrity. Her relationships with others also began to transform. Friends and colleagues now saw her as someone strong, resilient, and wise. She helped those around her navigate challenges, offering guidance and support without judgment. Her experiences had taught her empathy, patience, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Through her actions, she became a beacon of hope, showing that kindness and perseverance could lead to profound change. The observer remained a quiet presence behind the scenes. He continued to monitor the broader social impact of the events, ensuring that justice remained enforced and that the young woman's life stayed on a positive path. He did not interfere unnecessarily, understanding that empowerment comes from within. But he was ready to act if new challenges arose. His approach was always patient, strategic, and thoughtful. He knew that lasting change required more than immediate results. It required a foundation built on understanding, careful observation, timely intervention. As the city moved forward, the young woman's story inspired others to take action in their own lives. People began documenting injustice, supporting victims, and standing up against cruelty. The culture slowly shifted toward accountability and empathy. The narrative that had begun with a single act of cruelty and a quiet observer had grown into a movement that touched countless lives, demonstrating that even small acts of courage could trigger widespread change. The cruel man, for his part, faced ongoing consequences. He was forced to reconcile with the impact of his actions and the reality that fear and power alone could not protect him. He began to reflect on the importance of empathy, respect, and fairness, though whether he would internalize these lessons fully remained uncertain. His downfall served as a cautionary tale to others, reinforcing the idea that accountability is inevitable and that no one is above the consequences of their actions. The young woman, now thriving in her new life, found peace in her accomplishments and the knowledge that her perseverance had not gone unnoticed. She continued to pursue her goals, help others, and advocate for fairness in her community. Her journey demonstrated that resilience and integrity could overcome fear and adversity, and that one person's determination could inspire widespread change. The observer, satisfied with the outcome, knew that his role had been fulfilled. He had acted quietly, strategically, and with patience, ensuring that justice arrived in a way that was effective, permanent, and meaningful. He continued his work, always ready to intervene when necessary, but content in knowing that his actions had created lasting impact without seeking recognition or reward. In the end, the story concluded with more than just justice for one individual. It became a testament to the power of patience, courage, and thoughtful action. It showed that cruelty can be confronted, that fairness can be restored, and that one person, acting with wisdom and care, can change the course of events in ways that resonate far beyond the initial moment. The young woman's life had been transformed, the cruel man held accountable, and the observer's quiet influence ensured that the lessons of empathy, vigilance, and justice would continue to spread. Leaving the city, forever changed, the city itself carried the echoes of these events in its streets. Conversations and shared understanding. People moved through their daily lives with a renewed sense of awareness, knowing that injustice could be confronted and that acts of kindness and courage mattered. The young woman, empowered and resilient, continued to live her life with dignity and hope, a living reminder that perseverance, integrity, and quiet determination could overcome even the harshest cruelty. And the observer, watching from the shadows, remained a silent guardian of fairness, ensuring that justice, patience, and care remained powerful forces in the world.